Proud supporters of Africa this week. Engine, with us, you are number one.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Africa This Week, your wrap of what happened across the continent. I'm Mashudu Masuta. In this edition, we look at two momentous events that took place this week. The climate change talks underway in Durban, South Africa, and the 23rd World AIDS Day on December the 1st. Now, with the world anxious to get news on the outcome of the Kyoto Protocol and whether major economies will be reaffirming their commitment to reducing carbon emissions, we spoke to Dr. Steve Lennon, Divisional Executive at Eskom International, for his thoughts on COP17's impact on power producers.
What we have seen even leading up to COP17, an enormous amount of ownership of climate change that's been taken by business. If we just take a look at South African business, for example, we had initiated by Eskom, Sasol and Impala Platinum something called the Chief Executives Forum that was aimed at mobilizing the activities of companies around South Africa to take a very different and progressive approach to climate change. And I think we've seen that. If we look at what we've been doing in Eskom in recent years, just in the last year, the use of renewable energy at our coal-fired power stations with a view to making them more efficient. So for example, we launched photovoltaic systems at both Kendal and Letaba power stations, photovoltaic carports at our megawatt park headquarters. But also we've seen the South African energy consumer taking ownership. I mean, we've rolled out 47 million compact fluorescent light bulbs. We've seen the solar water heating program pick up. And all of this has resulted in the last 3 years in really saving the emissions of the equivalent of one of our large coal-fired power stations. So I think we do see quite a lot of ownership by South African business. And I think that if you look at some of the deliberations that will be happening from international business, you'll be seeing evidence of that as well here at COP17.
All right, you talk to us about some of the initiatives taken at a leadership level in Eskom and other key industries in South Africa, products that are coming to market, but you also mentioned fire stations or coal-fired power stations, and people are saying that's exactly the problem. Our energy mix is still a fossil fuel driven one. It's a huge divergence from what the world is calling for.
Our energy mix is still 88% coal, and I think that that is something that we as Eskom and the South African government have indicated is not a comfortable position to be in. If you have a look at the integrated resource plan that is effectively our blueprint for investing in the power sector into the future, then that says by 2030 the emissions, the CO2 emissions from the South African power sector will have reduced by 32% from the current number of round about 950 grams per kilowatt hour down to 600 grams per kilowatt hour. That's a huge reduction. If you look at the two coal-fired power stations that Eskom is building as we speak, Kusile and Medupi, both of those power stations will be state-of-the-art. They'll be emitting considerably less CO2 than our existing fleet. So all of these are steps in the right direction. Yes, they are slow steps. Yes, they do take a long time. But then these are big investments. This is a long-term industry, and it requires a long-term approach in dealing with the problem.
We're obviously talking about renewables as a significant component of job creation, new technologies, a new kind of economy. Where does Eskom fit in this space? Because you are the monopoly electricity provider, and IPPs have often argued that you're elbowing them out. You don't want the competition from independent power producers.
Well, firstly, I think as far as leveraging investments for job creation, I think that all of the investments that are happening in the power sector are very, very powerful drivers of job creation in South Africa. For example, just on our Medupi power station already, you're looking at close to 20,000 direct and indirect jobs that have been created. And this is a conscious effort to ensure that we maximize the benefits of these investments to the South African economy. We anticipate we'd see exactly the same thing when the renewables industry really starts picking up. It's been picking up slowly over the last few years. So for example, the solar water heating industry over the last year or two, the photovoltaic industry. But we are going to be seeing, once the Department of Energy announces the winners of the 3,725 megawatts worth of renewables bids that are in the system as we speak, we'll be seeing a building up of the South African renewables industry, wind and solar in particular. The role of Eskom in all of this, Eskom will be the power off-taker. We will be the buyer of that power. The mandate to purchase that power will come from the Department of Energy and from the National Energy Regulator of South Africa. It will be included in the tariff. The tariffs will be agreed between the regulator and the Department of Energy. Eskom will enter into power off-take agreements. I just want to emphasize that Eskom is incredibly supportive of bringing additional players into the South African power sector. The challenges that we faced with in meeting the demand for electricity in South Africa are so enormous that we cannot do it by ourselves. And we really would like to see a lot more players in the power sector in South Africa in future.
There is fear that the COP17 climate change talks in South Africa may fail to reach consensus on extending the Kyoto Protocol. Meanwhile, we spoke to Dipuo Peters, South Africa's Minister of Energy, about some of the challenges facing the talks.
I think in any negotiations you do look for compromises because you'll never have 100% agreement. So we are also, as South Africa, appealing to the parties that are busy negotiating that they should gravitate faster towards each other and find a common ground and find solutions in the best interest of the people of the world. So we're saying, as South Africa, the mitigation targets that we have set ourselves of 34% reduction by 2020, we are going to achieve, because I'm saying this in terms of the integrated resource plan, we have actually made sure that in terms of the deployment of the different energy technologies, we work towards making it possible that we get to that.
Now, obviously, you provide leadership on this front and you will monitor all parties involved and citizens in the country. It's not the same story across the world. I mean, if you look at Western Europe, Germany is the best performer and they've only met 8% of the target. So there is a sense that the world is not singing off the same hymn sheet. Our commitment levels aren't the same. Leadership is not sufficient. Maybe we need to lower the bar.
You understand that our levels of development differ. There are those developed countries that have had more than 150 years of development, using the very technologies that we are saying today are energy inefficient and are responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions. So theirs is about making sure that they reduce the impact of what they have already created. We in the developing countries, we've got challenges of access. As we speak, if you say to somebody who doesn't have access to energy, you tell them that 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions come from energy. They say, what are you talking about? Because I don't even have that is polluting. So I think it is important that we understand that we need to balance, especially as developing countries. What we need to do is to balance the trajectory towards reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, whilst also improving on our access targets in terms of the meeting developmental goals, like halving poverty and making sure that people have got access.
You mentioned South Africa's integrated resource plan, and some are saying this is where the problem comes in. We are still focusing on coal-fired electricity. Fossil fuels are still the driver of energy, even when you talk renewables. That seems to be a big discrepancy.
Do you understand that, Lerato, as we speak, more than 90% of our electricity comes from fossil fuel? If we have to drastically reduce, it means we must switch off our power plants. I mean, forget it. It is not possible. What would we be saying to South Africa in terms of economic growth, social development, and making sure that we can provide the necessary interventions, even as health interventions? Everything about socio-economic development today needs energy. So whilst we're using the energy that we have and running the power plants that we have, we need to have coal to make sure that those that we have keep on running, whilst introducing the new. So we are phasing the coal out, but we're not going to totally eradicate coal, because the reserves of coal that we have in South Africa shows that we can still have coal for more than 100 years. And let me just explain to South Africans that it is not only South Africa that is using coal. America is still using coal, China is using coal, Russia is using coal. All these countries that are importing our coal, they are using it to generate power. South Africa has got the technology to produce liquid fuels from coal. We're doing that, and we're still going to do that, but in an environmentally sustainable way, by using the new technologies like underground coal gasification as well as carbon capture and storage.
Still at COP17, Samantha Loring spoke to Ali Abu Saba, Director of the Climate Change Coordination Committee at the African Development Bank, about the talks and Africa's developing nations.
This is the negotiations process, and I think it's really up to parties to try and come up with agreements on how this will move forward. For Africa in particular, a second commitment after the Kyoto Protocol is going to be key, because it is very difficult and probably a significant risk to leave the carbon market unregulated. And this is something that we'd really encourage all parties to try and come up with some form of agreement on how they can move forward on this, including, of course, listening to the concerns that Canada has.
Of course, they do have concerns, and the concerns is that big emitters like China and India, which are excluded from Annex 1 countries and aren't committed legally to reduce their emissions, won't be included in the second commitment period. Do you think that we should have a new multilateral agreement that includes these developing countries?
Well, I think the parties should be working towards reaching such agreement, and it's not going to be an easy thing. Countries, large emitters and developing countries such as China, they have the rights to develop, but they also have a major contribution to those emissions. How can you bring in a balance, and how can they become part of an agreement that would bring in benefits to the whole globe, but still be mindful of the concerns of a growing country like their own?